Welcome into Outkick the Show. I'm your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I hope all of you are having fantastic Tuesdays wherever you may be. We have got NFL coaching news coming fast and furious. The Panthers hire Matt Rhule. The Giants have hired Joe Judge, who, unless you are a Mississippi State fan, you probably don't remember or know that well. CNN has settled the lawsuit filed by Nicholas Sandmann. The Sandman puts CNN to sleep in his lawsuit over the Covington Catholic case. If you remember that viral sensation on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, we will discuss. Jerry Jones has a sleepover with Mike McCarthy, which is just really funny to think about. And the New York Times obituaries of Soleimani, the terrorist from Iran, compared with the obituary for the Cincinnati Bengals head coach, Sam Wyche. This is just out of control, but also hysterical. Welcome to the world that we live in today. We begin with Matt Rhule, who gets hired away from Baylor by the Carolina Panthers for a reported 7 years, $62.5 million. Including some incentives that could take his earnings all the way up to $70 million. That is nearly $10 million per year, nearly $9 million even without the incentives. Boom. What a big win for Matt Rhule. Now, I think it's justified. The guy at Baylor took over a 1-11 program in the wake of the Art Briles mess and took them to 11 wins inside of 3 years. Congrats to the Carolina Panthers on getting a guy who seems to be able, based on what he did at Temple and also what he has done at Baylor, to take lesser players and turn them into big-time winners. And so I like this hire for the Carolina Panthers. Now, the big decision the Panthers are going to have to make, of course, is what in the world do they do at quarterback? Is Matt Rhule going to stay committed to Cam Newton, or is it possible he goes into this draft and gets a new quarterback? Because let's be honest, Will Grier did not play very well. I don't know that Kyle Allen is the future of that franchise. So what are they going to do at Carolina? Could they make a move, go get a guy like Phillip Rivers coming back to North Carolina where he started his college career? Is Jameis Winston going to be a free agent? Marcus Mariota? Potentially Tom Brady? Lots of different moving parts. The NFL offseason is going to be fun to follow. But the hire is going on there, and Matt Rhule, again, is the hire for Carolina. The Giants have also made a hire, and I don't know a lot about him. You don't know a lot about him. But guess what? He's connected to Bill Belichick, and the number one way to get a head coaching job in the NFL has been for a generation or more, it feels like, be connected to Bill Belichick. The number two way of late, by the way, was be connected to Sean McVay. The New York Giants hired Joe Judge, who it sounds like Mississippi State was trying to hire as well. Instead, Judge goes to the Giants, 38 years old, special teams coordinator for 5 years with the Patriots, their wide receivers coach last year. So we will see exactly how this goes. Reports are that they are also talking potentially about Jason Garrett as their offensive coordinator, the former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So I am interested to see how this will all go. It's also thrown into stark relief the question of what's going on with the Rooney Rule. My position on it's pretty straightforward. I think being obsessed with the race of someone who is being hired is a fundamentally broken and racist mechanism by which to define a successful or unsuccessful hire. And so I don't think it makes sense to be obsessed with what the race is of anybody who gets a job. Just like I don't think it makes sense to be obsessed with what percentage of NBA All-Stars are white or Asian or Hispanic. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to be obsessed with what percentage of coaches are a particular race. Now, if you can show me that everybody is not being equally hired and given opportunities to get jobs, then I'll buy into there being an issue. But here is the larger context. If some NFL teams were being racist, right? Let's just assume that that's going on. And they were passing on otherwise qualified candidates who were not getting jobs, then the teams that are not racist would win more, right? Take it outside of the world of coaching, right? Let's pretend that there is a huge group of Asian defensive backs, cornerbacks, who are insanely talented, but are not getting an opportunity because there is racism against Asian defensive backs, right? And so Asian defensive backs are not getting an equal opportunity to get defensive back jobs in the NFL. If someone were out there willing to hire Asian defensive backs or give them scholarships, then they would win at a higher level than other people who are discriminating against those Asian defensive backs. In other words, if racism is at play in any way in the less qualified person getting a job, then the non-racist team would end up winning at a much higher level than the racist team because they would be going out and getting the more qualified player or the more qualified coach. I believe in market-based dynamics to solve issues, right? If talented people have success, then they will get hired, right? And so as a result, just use market-based economics here. This is what I think, honestly, Bill Belichick did with white wide receivers with the New England Patriots. I think he believed that white wide receivers were being undervalued compared to black wide receivers and that he could get them for a lower cost and win and have a competitive advantage with them. Similarly, if I am an owner and I believe that there are qualified candidates that are otherwise being overlooked because of their race or their background, then I have to be willing to take that chance if there are candidates out there. So think about it. Use your intelligence here. Racism would actually cut against a team if it actually was in play here. In other words, just think about it. By simply not being racist and going out and hiring someone who's not white, you would have a competitive advantage. And so that is why I think ultimately markets decide talent much better than quotas do or guaranteed job interviews or whatever else. If it leads to an otherwise sham process, like for instance, do I believe that Marvin Lewis was ever legitimately being considered to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? No. I think that was a sham interview because I don't think anybody out there would have been remotely happy if Marvin Lewis had ended up being a head coach to replace Jason Garrett for the Dallas Cowboys. I think most people would have said, okay, that's not a smart move. I think the Cowboys knew they wanted to get Mike McCarthy. I think they followed the Rooney Rule, sham process, conducted an interview that they had no interest whatsoever in hiring somebody for. I don't think the Rooney Rule works, but I don't think the Rooney Rule works because there typically is not a large collection of minority candidates that are ready to be head coaches because the people who enter at the lowest level of coaching and advance tend to be white. So if you want to address coaching inequality in some way, and again, I'm not somebody who sits around and says, hey, every single profession needs to perfectly mirror the overall racial population of the United States, because if every single profession mirrored the racial population of the United States, then 65% of all NBA jobs would go to white people, and only 12% of NBA jobs would go to black people, right? And 13% would go to Hispanics. Every single job is not going to mirror America. In fact, if you wanted to be a hardcore social justice warrior and go sign a new NBA or NFL franchise or whatever it was, imagine that the newest NFL franchise owner comes out and he says his team is going to perfectly reflect America. It's going to be 51% female, 49% male, 65% white, 12% black, 13% Hispanic, 6% Asian, or whatever the heck it is. You know what that team would do? Lose every game and maybe not score a touchdown all season long. Talent is not evenly distributed in this country or in this world. So expecting that every single profession is going to perfectly reflect the overall population basis is flawed. But again, if there is some huge segment, I believe this for Google or Apple or any other company, if there's some huge segment of underutilized talent that is not getting jobs, then other companies should hire those people and take advantage of the fact that they're getting lower cost, better quality workers. That's how a market-based economy would work. If it truly doesn't matter who you hire, right? If it truly doesn't matter who you hire, then you got a monopoly, and we need to be regulating the Googles and the Apples of the world because their overall hire doesn't matter. Their business is such a monopolistic power that it doesn't even matter what they hire. They can just put whoever they want in jobs and they still succeed. That's the very definition to me of a monopoly. But that is my analysis of the overall hiring marketplace in general. And I feel that way across the board for the vast majority of highly competitive jobs, which many people want, and that relatively few people have the skills to be able to do at a high level. Also, Jerry Jones hires Mike McCarthy, has a sleepover. I just got to say this right off the top here. I don't do sleepovers, all right? I am not in favor in any way, of an opportunity to go out. I'm going to have to block this guy. There's some of you, by the way, that occasionally come in here and are so obsessed with being victims that I have to block you, okay? Most of coaching is about putting in the time. You have to be willing to work 100 hours a week for virtually no money at a young age, okay? And you have to be willing to do it for years and years and years for virtually no pay. And the fact that you have to put in all those years of effort in order to make any money at all is, I think, very often a barrier to entry to a lot of people who don't want to work that hard and they want to make the money, right? So when you start at coaching, there are very few professions. My profession is actually a good one. Sports media, you start at like way below what the normal person would make because there are so many different people who want to do this job. Like, for instance, if you want to work in radio, if you want to work in sports talk radio and you come out of college with a degree, you might have to go to work and make $14,000 a year. Just like if you go into coaching. And you might have to work 60 or 80 hours a year or a week in order to work on that $14,000 a year, right? It takes a long time to get up to where most of your average classmates who are going to work at insurance agencies or car relationships, car dealerships or anything else start to make. Your money comes when you invest in yourself if you are good. And a lot of people, frankly, don't want to invest in themselves, work that many hours, have that little of a life when they're 22, 23, and 24 years old. I understand it. I totally get it, okay? But if you are willing to do that, if you are willing, as someone said, to delay your gratification and put in the time and effectively an apprenticeship, then eventually you can start to recoup orders of magnitude more of your salary. If you look at those salaries, very often they're like hockey sticks, right? They make no money, and then boom, they're making a ton. I bet a decade ago, Matt Rhule was making maybe $100,000 a year, and then boom, he suddenly takes off and he's making a ton of money. So Jerry Jones has a sleepover. He hires Mike McCarthy. I think the biggest issue for the Cowboys here is the Mike McCarthy hire doesn't change anything. They still have to figure out what they're going to do with Dak Prescott. They still have to figure out what they're going to do with Amari Cooper. And in general, I think what they do with those two decisions is bigger than who they hire as their next head coach. And that's why I floated this morning, yesterday on Lock It In, this morning on Outkick, and today now I'm talking about it again on Periscope. Given the fact that Dak is an unrestricted free agent and that there are a lot of moving parts when you look at the potential quarterback market, whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, whether it's Cam Newton, Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, there are a lot of different moving parts at the quarterback position. Could it make sense for the Cowboys if they had the opportunity? This is the question I asked you for the poll today. Could it make sense to go out and grab, and I think it could, to go out and grab Tom Brady for a couple of years behind that offensive line, throwing to Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, Jarman, and all handing off to Ezekiel Elliott? Could the Cowboys be better off with a veteran? Could be Phillip Rivers, chance to win a championship in the next 2 or 3 years instead of having Dak Prescott? I don't claim to know the answer, but if you factor in what Dak is going to want, he's going to want to be the highest paid player in the history of the NFL. I think there could be some argument to make that the Cowboys should be kicking the tires on some of these free agents, including Brady and Phillip Rivers, before all is said and done. So I think the Jerry Jones sleepover is strange, but I think the Mike McCarthy hire is less significant than what happens with Dak, what they get him under contract for, and what they do with Amari Cooper going forward. And by the way, the Ryan Tannehill example is one that a lot of NFL teams are going to look at. Tannehill was found on the scrap heap, first-round quarterback. Titans get him for $7.5 million a year. Boom, he's the highest-rated passer in the league this year. And he's now got the Titans into the final 8 of the NFL playoffs. If they pull off the upset over the Ravens, all bets are off. They move into the Final Four. The real irony would be, can you imagine if Ryan Tannehill went back to Miami for the Super Bowl? If he got white hot and won 2 more games, then Ryan Tannehill would return to Miami with the Titans as a starting quarterback in the Super Bowl after the Dolphins said, you're not good enough to be our quarterback, and gave him away effectively to the Titans. Finally, a couple of additional stories that I think are worth paying attention to. News just broke that CNN has settled with the family of Nicholas Sandmann. The Sandmann was the high school kid from Covington Catholic who went viral on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. If you don't recall this story, we talked about it quite a bit because he went up to Washington, D.C. with his high school from, I believe it was Louisville, Kentucky area. High school, if I'm not, or Covington, but a small town like high school, went up there to the Lincoln Memorial. He was defamed through viral videos, and it made people like, oh, this kid is racist, this kid is horrible. The things that were said about him on social media were off the charts, negative. And the media followed the lead of this story as if this kid was a horrible racist. CNN has now settled. We don't know how much the amount is, but I feel pretty confident that the amount was likely to be very substantial. And I applaud Sandmann and his lawyers for going ahead and filing that lawsuit. I would have liked to have seen it go to trial because I'd like CNN to be held accountable for their reporting, but there are still multiple news organizations involved. I think there's a decent chance that that dollar figure is likely to reach at least 8 figures. And again, there are multiple defendants in this lawsuit. I think that the media should be held accountable at a bare minimum for when you have non-public figures, young high school kids out in public, and they take their lead from viral videos which have been edited to make the kids look awful. No matter who you are, if you've ever been or have young kids, it's pretty terrifying to think of what can happen to them based on total and complete fabricated lies that can spread in an instant through social media. And many of the people, celebrities included, who called for violence against these kids deserve to be held accountable for what they said as well. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. Believe in only 2 things absolutely, the First Amendment and boobs. But I'm here to tell you right now that this is not protected speech. When you get facts wrong and when you are inaccurate and you are defaming a high school kid and you are putting him in a position where he is in danger for his life and his family is in danger and you are allowing his name to be dragged through the mud everywhere, you should be held accountable. And so I'm glad that CNN is being held accountable. So that story is out there. I doubt that we will get the dollar figures for the settlement because I imagine CNN does not want that to go public. But it will be intriguing to see if there's any other more substantial fallout there. Finally, I love this because it, to me, totally ties in with the universe that we live in today and the treatment that we see on a regular basis. This is wild here. New York Times obituaries, and I want to include these in the short form videos that we're going to clip. I'll hold this up so you can see it. New York Times obituary: Qassem Soleimani, master of Iran's intrigue force, dies at 62. Okay, the terrorist that we killed in Iran, who has killed thousands of Iranians, probably tens of thousands of Iranians, is a terrorist and has killed hundreds of Americans. We killed him, and the New York Times describes him as, quote, a master of Iran's intrigue force, dies at 62. Okay? Yeah, and by the way, women have no rights in Iran. They just got the right to go watch a soccer match. Okay? Never get held accountable by the media, never gets talked about at all, how retrogressive and lacking in basic human rights somebody in Iran is compared to America, all right? That's the New York Times obituary. I'm holding it up right now for this murderous, terroristic, religious zealot who we killed in the Middle East, all right? Here is a New York Times obituary as well. Sam Wyche, Sam Wyche, who was the last coach to lead the Cincinnati Bengals to the Super Bowl, but who was later fined by the National Football League for barring a female reporter from the team's locker room, has died. That is the New York Times. I want you to think about how crazy that is. I'm holding it up right now. That is the New York Times obituary notice for Sam Wyche. So Sam Wyche, who banned a woman from going into the locker room to interview naked men, is criticized in the opening sentence of his obituary in the tease that they put out everywhere. Again, Sam Wyche, who was the last coach to lead the Cincinnati Bengals to the Super Bowl, kind of a big deal, but who was later fined by the NFL for barring a female reporter from the team's locker room, has died. That's the first thought that the New York Times has when Sam Wyche dies. And by the way, this is reflective of how far left-wing the sports media is. You are defining a 70-some-odd-year-old man who has coached in the NFL for years, who went to the Super Bowl based on the fact that he didn't allow a woman one time to enter the locker room, okay? That is his obituary. That's according to the New York Times. The same couple of hours, they describe Qassem Soleimani, master of Iran's intrigue and force, dies at 62. No mention of him being a terrorist. No mention of him killing tens of thousands of people. But you mentioned Sam Wyche not letting a woman in the locker room. Don't mention that, or we killed one of the leading and most wanted terrorists in the entire world. This is the kind of lack of fairness that I see on a regular basis. I see it all the time connected to the world of sports. I love all of you. I try to share stories like this, and I appreciate all of you in general. My name is Clay Travis. This has been Outkick the Show. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. And next half hour, I'm going to be on FS1. Lock it in. Your boy's the king because of the Titans' big win over the Patriots. I'll be making gambling picks for you tonight, as well as for the divisional rounds of the NFL playoffs. All of that still to come. Love all of you. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. Kisses. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Love you. Thank you, Facebook. See y'all.